Okay, we are now on lecture 13 on Sikhism. So the first leader or sort of founder of Sikhism is Guru Nanak, who is considered a great teacher, and he appeared in northern India in the 15th century. His followers were called Sikhs, meaning disciples, students, seekers of truth. And then there was a succession of gurus. He was succeeded by 9 enlightened gurus, ending with Gobind Singh. Sikhism, not a lot of people know much about it. However, it is the 5th largest world religion. Quote, many Sikhs understand their path not as another sectarian religion, but as a statement of the universal truth within and transcending all religions. So there's an underlying universalism within Sikhism. And you'll remember universalism is the idea that all religions are talking about the same ultimate reality, and they have more in common than they have differing from each other. And given this sort of universalism, Sikhs do not actively seek converts. However, it is a growing religion. So, the relationship to Hinduism and Islam. So, past scholars actually classified Sikhism as an offshoot of Hinduism because it's native to India, northern India, or a synthesis of Hindu and Muslim traditions of northern India. So, it's there's aspects of Hinduism and aspects of Islam within Sikhism. Quote, but Sikhism has its own unique quality, independent revelation, and history. So they have a unique succession of gurus, and they have their own scripture and their own history. So they're sort of a unique group, and it makes more sense to classify them as their own religion rather than just an offshoot of Hinduism or a synthesis of Hinduism and Islam. There's enough unique to the tradition to consider it its own independent tradition. So more about Guru Nanak. Those are the dates that he lived. What is known is based on the Janam Sakhis, which are traditional stories about his life. And these gave shape to Sikhism. He gave shape to Sikhism while the Sant movement was challenging conventional religious beliefs and practices. And the word Sant is etymologically related to the word saint. Sants are holy people and North Indian poets who rejected outward forms of ritual expression in favor of deep spiritual inwardness. It's also significant that they rejected caste distinctions, and the Sikhs will inherit that posture towards the caste system, that they reject it. Guru Nanak agreed with the Sant movement, but had a vision of an organized spiritual community. So the Sant movement sort of is the foundation of Sikhism, but Sikhism is sort of a more institutionalized communal organization of the values of the Sant movement. And Sikhs and Guru Nanak lived in the religiously diverse and perpetually war-torn Punjab region of northern India and Pakistan, what's today Pakistan. According to tradition, Nanak was little concerned with worldly things. He had a contemplative nature, but resisted the formalities of Hindu religion as a child. According to tradition, at age 30, he immersed in a river and did not emerge for 3 days. Then the Almighty sent him back into the world to redeem it from Kali Yuga. So you'll remember the concept of Kali Yuga comes from Hinduism, and it's the idea that there are these yugas, or really long stretches of time, these massive ages that divide up time, and we're living in the Kali Yuga, which is marked by corruption and pollution and just sort of a really fallen age. He traveled through India, the Himalayas, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and Arabia, teaching through all those areas. He emphasized 3 central teachings as a straight path to God. working hard in society to earn one's own honest living, as opposed to being withdrawn from the world and practicing some sort of asceticism or renouncing worldly life, sharing one's earnings with the needy, and remembering God at all times as the only doer, the only giver. So this is generally a monotheistic tradition. Guru Nanak fed people with his family as farmers at a langar, which is a free community kitchen with no caste distinctions. And he won followers from both Hinduism and Islam, and we'll get to how Sikhism blends those traditions. But first, we need to continue discussing the succession of gurus and sort of the leadership within the Sikh tradition. So eventually, there was a total of 10 Sikh gurus. Nanak was succeeded by Angad, a model of humility and service to the needy, and the third and fourth gurus were Amar Das and Ram Das, and they helped develop organizational structures for the Sikh Panth. And Panth just means community, the way in Islam, the Ummah refers to the Muslim community. The fifth guru, Arjun Dev, built the Golden Temple in the holy city of Amritsar. He also compiled the sacred scriptures, known as the Abi Granth. Originally, it was an original holy book known as the Guru Granth Sahib today, and it was compiled from devotional hymns. So we'll talk about it. It gets confusing. So there's scripture, which in its original form was called the Abi Granth at the time it was compiled, and it was compiled from theology that was figured out in devotional hymns, and so it was put down in scripture as the Abi Granth. But it gets confusing. Later, the scripture itself is considered a guru that finishes the succession of gurus. So we'll talk more about that later. Emperor Akbar, who you'll remember is a Muslim emperor from the Mughal Islamic Empire, and he was very pluralistic. He visited the third, fourth, and fifth gurus and was pleased with their teachings. The sixth guru, Har Gobind, established a Sikh army to protect Sikhism and defend the weak of all religions. And Sikhs then carried 2 swords, one to represent temporal power and one to represent spiritual power. The seventh guru, Har Raj, was a pacifist. You don't need to remember all these gurus, obviously. The eighth guru, Har Krishan, was a child guru that died at age 8. And the ninth guru, Te Bahadur, was martyred and was a defender of religious freedom. The 10th guru, Gobind Singh, turned the Sikhs into saint soldiers. And initiated men were given the surname Singh, which means lion, the women Kaur, which means princess, and women are treated as equals generally. And Khalsa refers to pure ones, and that's the name given to initiates. The 5 Ks. So we're going to start getting into sort of the content of the Sikh religion. We've learned about the gurus and understand that Sikhism is based on a unique tradition of revelation and leadership. But there are 5 distinct symbols of dedication that mark and distinguish a Sikh from the general population. One would be unshorn hair. So that is hair that's not shaved or cut, and it is respect for God's creation is what that symbolizes, that you leave it as it is. A comb, because Hindus that were ascetics or sannyasins who didn't cut their hair kept theirs long and matted, whereas Sikhs kept theirs tidy. Drawstring underbreeches or underwear, and this is to symbolize modesty and to help them with riding horses because they were saint soldiers, which we'll talk more about. A sword in a sheath to defend justice, and a steel bracelet to symbolize being a servant to God. I don't know why a steel bracelet symbolizes that, But it's kind of confusing. These are called the 5Ks because every one of these things begins with the letter K when they're articulated in the original Sikh language of Punjabi. So these have been the hallmarks of Sikh identity, what distinguish Sikhs from the general population since 1699, and that's what distinguishes them more specifically from Muslims and Hindus in the surrounding areas. They're not only symbols of power and separate identity, but they're symbols of egalitarianism or equality and spirituality. Quote, by mandating the same symbolic dress for people of all castes, both women and men, so women have the same 5Ks too, Sikhs gave both genders and all castes equal importance contrary to Indian cultural traditions. So this was a radically egalitarian movement responding to hierarchies within Indian society. The devotee who wields the sword and the sword itself is often referred to in female terms. So that's a really interesting that the default Sikh in the mind of Sikhs is use feminine terms to talk about her. And the sword itself is often given the pronoun she. And the bracelet is a circle reminder of the infinite one. So that's the use of the bracelet. The succession of gurus. So Guru Gobind Singh transferred his authority. He was the last guru, less human guru, to the scripture that was the Adi Granth. And thenceforth, the scripture that was originally called the Adi Granth is called Guru Granth Sahib. And it's the living presence of the guru embodied in sacred scripture. So the scripture itself is is personified as a guru, the final guru. Udasis. These are renunciates who do not withdraw from the world, but rather practice strict discipline and meditation, while at the same time trying to serve humanity. And their missionary work began under Baba Siri Chand, the ascetic leader, elder son of Nanak. The Sikh Empire. So they had political power at one point. The Mughal Empire, which was an Islamic empire, began to disintegrate, and Sikhs began establishing small political states in the Punjab. In the 19th century, there was a Sikh empire, which had a non-sectarian government under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And it attempted to create a pluralistic society with religious tolerance as a value, but it was subdued by the British in 1849 after half a century. India's independence movement. So India sought independence from the British, and Sikhs contributed in the fight for independence. And they provided heroic examples of nonviolent resistance to oppression despite military abilities. So they had their own military, but chose the route of nonviolent resistance, which was the route of Gandhi and the larger Indian nationalist movement. And the British left India in 1947, and they, in so doing, created the division between India and Pakistan. So you'll remember Pakistan is sort of the Muslim territory, Muslim majority territory that was originally part of India. So many Sikhs were displaced in this process. But, quote, resistance to oppression has remained a hallmark of Sikhism. They're very social justice oriented. So more about their central beliefs. They believe in God. They're monotheistic. Their major focus is loving devotion to God, quote, whom the Sikhs recognize as the same one worshipped by many different names around the world. So they claim like there's one ultimate reality or God, and all religions are trying to interact with this God, and that's the basis of religion. Sikhs often refer to God as Sat, or truth, or as Ik Ankar, the one supreme being. And God is considered pure being without form, so he's not like personified. God is seen as beyond gender. And Nam is the holy name of God that dwells in all creation. Quote, God is not separate from this world. God pervades the cosmos, and this can be found within everything. So Nam is like the immanent presence of God in creation. So some common beliefs with Hinduism include the belief in karma and reincarnation. And the major overlap with Islam is, of course, monotheism. And Sikh Sant Sipahis, or saint soldiers, are pledged to protect the freedom of all religions. There's an emphasis on interfaith and challenging hypocrisy. And the idea is that the ego is a hindrance to God realization because it separates you from God. It gives you a unique identity separate from God. Quote, the ultimate goal of life is mystical union with the divine reflected in one's way of living. So, like the Sufis, they're seeking oneness with God and absorption into God. Gender equality. So the gurus accorded considerable respect to women. None of the gurus were women, however, but there were many female Sikh saints who were revered. Some include Bibi Nanaki, Nanak's sister, who was his first devotee. Yet, preference for sons persisted in the Sikh community, and that's because that was a cultural value within India, which was highly patriarchal. And they practiced the dowry tradition, which is in India, where when a woman marries a man, the woman's family provides a dowry or a certain amount of wealth and riches to the husband's family in order to, as like a gift for basically taking her off of their hands as a economic responsibility. So that's a pretty harsh patriarchal tradition. But Guru Gobind Singh forbade female infanticide. So in India and in China too, and in a lot of places in Asia, we know that there's a substantial portion of the female population missing. Naturally, in a given population, there's slightly more women than men, but there are significantly less women than men in these parts of the world, and that is unfortunately due to practices of female infanticide, which is well documented, and also not well documented in certain regions. And also it's given modern technology in certain parts of the world, if women get an ultrasound and know a baby is going to be a girl, they'll receive an abortion too. So you have infanticide and gender-based abortion as well. Righteous war. So there is a concept of sort of like a holy war or righteous war within Sikhism, even though one guru was a pacifist. So, but their guru Gobind Singh laid out strict standards for battle that Sikhs are to follow. Military means are always a last resort. No enmity or feeling of revenge. No territories or property are to be gained. You are not to use mercenaries or paid soldiers, and the soldiers must conduct themselves morally. Minimal force is to be used, and hostilities end when the objective is attained. So sacred practices, they lead very disciplined lives. There are hours of daily prayer that Sikhs adhere to different degrees. If any religion, the sacred practices are adhered to differing degrees. Like there are Muslims that don't do the 5 prayers every day. It depends. There's the continual repetition of the name of God, Nam, detachment from negative worldly mind states. Those are the goals of practice. Nam, again, is the essence of creation or God's immanent presence in the world. But there are many other names for God, such as Rama and Allah. But Allah, as you'll remember, just means the God in Arabic. They abstain from drugs, tobacco, and alcohol. They are very active in fighting injustice. They fight on the front line against injustice. and they try to vanquish what they call the 5 evils in themselves, which are lust, anger, greed, attachment, and ego. They founded institutions which were intended to help create a new social order with no caste distinctions. So as we mentioned, a langar, sort of like a community kitchen. It's a community meal at Gurdwara, was originally established, and the building is used for public worship. You have a sangat, which is a congregation in which all are equal. However, per Indian custom, so it was a cultural custom, there was gender segregation originally at the sangat. Morning and evening prayers typically take 2 hours. And a kirtan is a devotional tradition of singing or chanting from the Guru Granth Sahib, which is, again, their scriptures that they've personified. There's a custom for only men to preach and officiate at ceremonies until 1996. However, women were never officially barred. So there was a lot of sexism and patriarchal customs within Indian society that persisted in the Sikh community. But on the whole, the tradition and its articulation and expression today are pretty feminist, are pretty progressive when it comes to gender relations. So Sikhism today, even though it's the world's 5th largest religion, it constitutes less than 2% of India's population. Yet, Sikhs had a leading role in governing the nation. Dr. Manmohan Singh served as the country's India's first Sikh prime minister from 2004 to 2014. The geographical center of Sikhism remains the Punjab, which is under Muslim rule today, but there are large Sikh communities in Britain, Canada, the US, Italy, Malaysia, Singapore, and Kenya. Sikhs originally wanted a Sikh state that they would call Khalistan, but that project failed. And self-styled Sikh saints or gurus occasionally claim special powers, antagonizing mainstream Sikhs and often leading to the establishment of offshoots of Sikhism. There are tensions between the tradition of universalism and even pluralism on the one hand, and the building up of exclusivist tensions on the other hand. But the nature of Sikhism is very ecumenical or universalist. That's occasionally downplayed within the tradition to assert the unique identity of Sikhs. So sometimes they sort of lean towards exclusivism in order to sort of solidify the religion's identity. They've been harassed in other countries because they wore head coverings or traditional turbans. So in the United States, when hate-based crimes against Muslims were on the rise, a lot of Sikhs were the victims of hate crimes and harassment because people assumed Sikhs were Muslims because they looked more like the harassment. Islamophobia also overlaps with racism towards Arabs. And since they were wearing turbans, they looked more stereotypically Arab. So they were mistaken as Muslims. So they're the mistaken victims of hate crimes often. So some questions describe the status of women in Sikhism. So there's 2 threads or patterns of gender relations in Sikhism. There's the tradition itself, which seems highly progressive and focused on egalitarianism or equality, and includes women in ways that were really radical throughout history. But there are also the perpetuation of Indian customs, for example, the dowry custom, which are highly oppressive to women. Describe how Sikhs perceive religions other than their own. So again, the heart of the religion is universalism, that all religions, they believe, are addressing the same God. or ultimate reality in their own ways. However, there are moments throughout history where Sikhs become more exclusivist to assert their own identity. What is the relationship of Sikhism to Hinduism and Islam? Similarities, differences. So the major ones would be with Hinduism, reincarnation and karma. Those are the basic overlaps there. But with Islam, it would be monotheism, the monotheistic heart. Okay, and that is it for lecture 13.